the president announced a new 50% tariff. Over time, we have become too dependent on the United States as our biggest customer, with more than 90% of our steel exports going south of the border. They use tariffs to take our businesses, not only steel but other businesses as well. We must rely more on Canadian steel for Canadian projects. $900. That's the sticker on a ton of U.S. steel tonight. A week ago, it was barely $700. The spike didn't come from Wall Street. It came from one pen stroke on June 4th, when President Trump doubled steel and aluminum tariffs to a crushing 50%. Within hours, Canada's mills, America's closest metal lifeline, froze almost every outbound rail car. Detroit's assembly lines felt the shock first. Presses went silent, robots stalled, and night shift paychecks were put on hold. Meanwhile, across the border, Hamilton's blast furnaces roared back to life, lighting the skyline like a wartime foundry. Mark Carney fired the next shot, calling Washington's move an own goal of historic scale and slamming the trade door shut. So, how did a policy meant to boost U.S. industry end up starving Motor City of the one material it can't build without? Why is America's oldest ally suddenly rationing its steel like a strategic weapon? And who's really going to pay when the production lines stop? Ottawa, Beijing, or Main Street, USA? Stay with us. The answers start right now. June 4th, 2025. Dawn in Washington, the proclamation hit the Federal Register before commuters hit the Beltway. By lunchtime, steel headed for American docks carried a brand new 50% duty, double the 2018 rate and high enough to price out half the globe's mills. 12 hours later, phones lit up from Cleveland to Monterey with the same blunt math. Any hot rolled coil that cleared customs at Tuesday's price would bleed red ink by Wednesday. The panic showed up first in the future. On June 5th, the very next trading session, Newer lifted its base quote to $900 a short ton, a jump of almost $150 in 2 weeks. For automakers, that is sticker shock in slow motion. A standard pickup swallows roughly 1 ton of steel. Multiply the surcharge across an annual run of 1.5 million F-Series, and Ford alone faces a $500 million metal bill before it welds a single cab. Yet the bigger rupture came north of the border. Catherine Cobden of the Canadian Steel Producers Association told reporters that U.S. orders have basically vanished, making it impossible to sell south right now. Translation: the 12 million tons Canada usually ships each year just evaporated, and with it, the feedstock for Detroit's stamping presses. Prime Minister Mark Carney wasted no airtime, branding the tariff an own goal and hinting at export quotas on critical minerals if Washington refuses to blink. His threat landed while blast furnaces in Hamilton roared back to capacity, chasing Asian contracts. While Ford's River Rouge foundry idled 2 lines for material shortages, Wall Street read the headlines and shaved 0.75% off the S&P by the closing bell. A dip traders nicknamed the Trump session teaser. The irony couldn't be sharper. A protectionist wall built to save U.S. jobs has, in week 1, outsourced raw metal, frozen Motor City assembly robots, and handed Canada the throttle on North America's supply chain. And this is merely Act 1. Ford's CEO didn't need a crystal ball. On May 7, 2025, CEO Jim Farley warned that the 50% steel and aluminum levy would dump a $2.5 billion surcharge onto this year's books, forcing Ford to pull its profit forecast on the spot. 1 month earlier, on March 4th, a Reuters brief had already put a price tag on the pain, projecting that tariffs could inflate some Mexico-built models by up to 25%, roughly $2,000 on a mid-size crossover. Sticker shock rippled through showrooms by the next weekend. Dealers from San Antonio to Seattle slapped temporary surcharges on import-heavy trims while factory order banks slowed to a crawl. Yet the deepest bruise showed up in the jobs ledger. By the 4th of April, Michigan's unemployment rate hit 5.4%, the worst in the nation and a full point above the U.S. average of 4.1%. Local economists pinned the spike on one missing ingredient: Canadian coil. Each F-150 assembled in Dearborn swallows a ton of steel. At $900 per ton, River Rouge is burning through a six-figure metal bill every 3 minutes. Multiply that across the planned 1.5 million truck run, and the math tops $1.3 billion before. A single wage or coat of paint. Capitol Hill took notice. On July 21st, a bipartisan pack of Great Lakes senators crossed into Ottawa, pleading with Prime Minister Mark Carney to loosen what they called a metal blockade. Carney offered only talk of export quotas that will keep even more sheet at home. The takeaway is brutal. A tariff wall meant to shield U.S. industry is starving Detroit of the very alloy it breathes, handing Canada the supply chain steering wheel and putting Main Street USA on layoff watch. Unless that wall comes down fast, Motor City may be staring at a 2008-style rerun, this time with no bailout waiting at the exits. Carney read Trump's tariff decree like a starter pistol. By sunrise on the 16th of July, the Canadian PM unveiled a $1 billion Canadian Steel Modernization Fund. The cash is earmarked to rip out coal-fired blast furnaces and drop in electric arc and hydrogen rigs across Ontario's mill belt. Less than an hour later, Ottawa iced the import spigot. Any steel from non-free trade partners now faces a tariff. Rate quota cut in half. Once the 2024 tonnage cap is hit, a 50% duty slams down like a portcullis. That means cheap slab from Turkey or Brazil stops at the dock unless buyers swallow a price tag fatter than the U.S. levy itself. The math works only because Ontario's grid is already 93% emissions-free, powered by hydro dams on the Niagara and a nuclear spine that hums day and night. According to the province's IESO, that clean mix keeps Hamilton's furnaces 3 to 4 times greener than the global average. That edge puts the Canadian coil on the right side of Europe's carbon border adjustment mechanism when the EU starts charging for embedded carbon in 2026. For ArcelorMittal Dofasco, Hamilton's biggest steel plant, the fund is basically a golden ticket. They've already got shovels in the ground for a new direct reduced iron unit. That unit will feed 2 electric arc furnaces. Together, the upgrade should chop about 5 million tons of emissions every year. And once natural gas prices settle down, it's set to drag production costs way lower. Detroit, meanwhile, watches helplessly. Every ton that used to roll south on CN, rail is now booked for Rotterdam or Bizen, stamped CBA ready and worth a premium use automakers cannot match. By the time River Rouge lines restart at full speed, Ottawa's hedge may have locked Canada into Europe's supply chain, leaving Motor City to pay Trump's bill with interest. And the billion-dollar question is simple. How do you compete with a neighbor who just turned your tariff shock into a clean steel moonshot? Alberta isn't swinging back at Trump's tariff barrage. It's sidestepping it. On July 22nd, Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Ontario signed a fresh memo. The deal says every new oil, mineral corridor, pipelines, rail spurs, even service roads must use steel melted in Ontario. That homegrown rule boots use pipe mills right off the bid sheet. The American Iron and Steel Institute says Canada shipped about 6.56 million tons of steel to the states last year, and a bit more than 1 million of those tons were lined pipe. Now every pound of that metal is spoken for. It's staying inside Canada or rolling down export routes that never even pause at a U.S. customs booth. Ottawa just cranked the pressure tighter. Last week, a trade bulletin cut the quota for tube and pipe from countries without a free trade deal to half of last year's limit. Anything that tries to slip in above that line gets slapped with the same 50% tariff. U.S. energy contractors felt the sting immediately. Before the tariff war, America imported roughly 40% of its oil country tubular goods, the heavy-duty pipes that keep wells alive. By March 12th, analysts told Reuters that Canada and Mexico still supplied 16% of that OCTG stream, but at a landed cost projected to jump 15% this year. The ripple effect is brutal. Small drillers in Texas and North Dakota can't lock in pipe deliveries without swallowing the new premium. Midstream service firms see $100 million bids vanish as Alberta insists on made-in-Canada plate. Maintenance crews on Enbridge's Midwest grid are cannibalizing stockpile joints. Because replacement orders languish in customs purgatory, corporate America has no quick fix. Building new domestic ERW mills takes years. Rerouting crew by rail invites higher insurance and derailment risk. Meanwhile, Alberta's treasury pockets the fabrication work and the political capital, framing it as an energy security play. In one memorandum and one quota tweak, Canada has weaponized its clean power advantage and eroded the region's pipeline future, leaving U.S. suppliers staring at empty order books while Detroit wrestles with rusting robots. While pipeline steel is sealed north of the border, Europe quietly sets a carbon toll gate. On the 1st of January 2026, the European Union flipped the switch on its carbon border adjustment mechanism, charging every imported ton of steel the same carbon price European mills pay, with EU allowances for cast to average $88.95 per ton. That year, the levy could tack on roughly $90 to every short ton rolling into Antwerp. Ottawa sees a jackpot. Back on the 18th of February 2025, consultancy Anthesis told clients Canada's hydronuclear grid makes its coil low-carbon CBAM ready, poised to leapfrog higher emission rivals. Translation: EU buyers now scanning barcodes for carbon. Intensity will see Canadian sheet green tagged and U.S. slab red flagged. Every truckload that once rumbled south to Michigan can pivot east to Rotterdam, command a premium, and still dodge Trump's tariff wall. For American households, the math swings the other way. The Tax Foundation pins the president's tariff roster. At a $1,296 hit to the average family wallet this year. An entire month of grocery savings gone. Detroit executives know the double bind: pay the carbon toll and lose price wars in Europe, or stick with the old blast furnace and swallow a 50% duty at home. Either path shreds margins already paper-thin after the pandemic chip crunch. Meanwhile, Brussels dangles a carbon passport. Producers proving emissions below the EU average pay nothing at the border. Canada's mills running on renewable electrons. Clear that Bard today Donna's plants, still 63% coal-fed, do not. So the supply chain lines up, as always, chasing the cheapest lane. Trump built a tariff fence to shield American jobs. Brussels built a carbon gate that redirects them. And Mark Carney just opened Canada's side door. Your turn. Should Washington spring for clean steel or keep the tariff armor on and hope the world waits? Sound off below. 50% sounded like a job shield. Instead, it slammed the gate on imports and left Detroit hunting for steel while Hamilton's furnaces burn bright through the night. Ford is bleeding $2.5 billion. Michigan just lost its star employment badge. And Congress is still arguing over who lit the fuse while Canada quietly rebuilds its mills with clean power and hydrogen. If Europe's CBAM starts on schedule in 2026, Canadian coil will roll straight into Antwerp on a carbon passport, and high-emission use slab could face a double tax at home and abroad. The negotiation window is still cracked open, but the countdown clock is already ticking. So, here's the question. Will Washington defuse the tariff time bomb or double down and watch the world pass it by? Drop your take in the comments, because your voice might just script the next move in this global steel and tax chess game.